Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. I'm yet at another part of the house. I don't think I've ever podcasted from this room in the back. This is the center room in the back. One of my favorite rooms, actually. And I like everything about this place, but mainly because my son and I got it built together. His hands, my money. And it's the night before Christmas, and I thought I would do a show. Why not, right? I don't have anything really planned, but we'll just sort of muddle our way through and make the best of it. You know, I'm tempted to just put on one of my hats, but you know, I'm reminded of what Jody said. You know, I thought Bruce was bald. No, I'm not bald. It's just that, you know, even after I shower or soak myself and wash in the sauna, I don't often comb my hair. So I often sort of just look, my hair is always disheveled. And I never become conscious of it because there's no mirrors up here except for one tiny little mirror I use to shave. And that's because I shave with a straight edge razor, but there's really not a whole lot in the way of self-reflection up here, right? I see myself when I podcast, right? Like I'm looking at myself right now. And that's when I start to become conscious of appearance. But for most of the time, I'm completely unconscious of it. I'm just going to quickly check to make sure that I am in fact podcasting. Please give me a moment. And I just have to do this now because so many times I've yep, 'twas the night before. Yep, I am live, so there we go. So yeah, I don't really have a lot of reflections of myself, which is interesting, you know, to live without, you know, any sort of self-reflection. Well, I think that tonight I'm going to do something of like a more personal podcast, because it's Christmas, and Christmas is in fact a spiritual holiday. And to my sensibilities, spirituality is about love, the capacity to give and receive love, real love, unconditional love. And that's always been something that's been extremely difficult for me. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I mean, I'm a lot better at it now. But because of the way that I was developed, you know, in my life, trusting people and letting people close to me was not something that came easy. And my life was such that I never really had enough going on financially to be able to care about somebody more than I cared about myself. So my resources were for myself. And coming here and living here has absolutely, unequivocally changed all of that. I am now learning all about the intricacies of love and forgiveness, because you can't love if you can't forgive. Because the people you love are always, always, always going to hurt you. That's just the way it is. There's no other way around it. Probably more than anybody else in your life, because we give them license to do that when we open ourselves up to them. So it took me a real long time to get comfortable with the idea of loving people. I mean, I've always loved people. Don't get me wrong. Like, I feel when people suffer. I feel when people are deprived of justice. But that's a kind of conceptual love, right? That's very popular now. People like to, what do they call it? Virtue signaling, where people project deep emotions into anonymous situations and pretend they have a great feeling for it. But the personal love is the most difficult. It's absolutely, unequivocally the most difficult form of love on the planet. I was going to say maybe, loving your family, loving your children, and this is where all our karma comes in too. It doesn't really come into our lives through strangers. It comes in through the people closest to us. A lot of people miss this fact. I don't know how, but they do. And it makes it much more difficult to love. But a life without love is no kind of life at all. And a life without sharing love is no kind of life at all. I mean, I suppose there are a few exceptions, like if you go into the wilderness, into the Himalayas, and you completely develop yourself, I'd say that's a well-lived life. And some might make the argument that you are in fact, you are in fact loving. You're grounding love to the world and doing it in a way that very few people can do it. So I suppose that's a good thing too. I don't know what it is about Christmas, but I always get like a little bit nostalgic. I don't know if you folks are the same. I tend to think of the past a lot at Christmas. It's a very reflective time for me. And I can go all the way back to about I don't know, I think 4 years old is the first Christmas I can remember. I can remember being at home and waiting for people to wake up in the morning so we could open gifts. Because on Christmas Day, as soon as your eyes open, you're up. You're not going down for that extra 30 minutes the way you might on a normal day. On Christmas Day, the moment you wake up is the moment you wake up, and you get up. And it's usually, several hours before your parents, and then your siblings get up. And then you're just sort of anxiously waiting around, like it's the NHL draft and you're waiting for your name to be called. It's really quite something, We had some nice Christmases at my home, It was always a kind of a nice time, I guess. And, for the first 10 or 12 years anyways. And then I've spent a lot of Christmases alone. This one, there's any number of things I could do. I mean, I could stop podcasting now, walk over to my brother-in-law's in the rain, and there's about 40 people over there getting liquored up, but I don't drink, so I'm not going to do that. I could watch TV, I suppose, but I don't feel like doing that. I feel like podcasting. And although it's not the end of the year yet, we can treat it as the end of the year for the sake of this podcast. We can treat it as the end of 2024. And boy, I mean, what a year it has been. So, one of the things that you notice when you're in a transformation cycle, and we're in a transformation cycle, and this is an intentionally engineered transformation cycle, but there's also, in my opinion, a rising presence of divinity as a vibration on the planet. And I think in a lot of ways it's interrupting the transformation cycle, the engineered transformation cycle. And when you start to figure things out, you start to get a grasp on what's going on down here. One of the things that you notice is that all the negative can really do is mimic. It can't really create anything on its own. It has no creative ability, because creative ability comes from the Creator. And negativity, to be in a deliberate negative state without trying to correct yourself, is deliberately cutting yourself off from the Creator, the Sustainer, the source of livable moments. Hey, Steve. Merry Christmas. And so you get cut off, and you can't be creative. But what you can do is you can be very analytical, and you can be very observant, and you can be very prescient. The demonic forces have all of this ability, and what they will try to do is put out a bootleg version of what the divine transformation is supposed to be. And so generally the negative is a foreshadowing of what's coming positively. Not many people see the negative that way. Most people get into too much of an antagonistic relationship with the negative, and they can't see it. But generally a bootleg is a copy of something that's already come into existence. But the way our cosmology works, it's visible on the other side before it materially manifests, and they're generally very forward-thinking. The negative forces on the planet use all of the occult sciences, and in many instances physical sciences now, to know what the future or the future plan is for the cycle. And what they do is they sort of bootleg it on the astral and project it to the physical. And so everything you see going on in the world now is a bootleg of what we're going to get spiritually. But right now it's just being offered to us technologically. Okay? And it's been going on for decades now. Several decades. Well, I'd say most of the 20th century, but it's getting particularly acute in the last few decades. So, for example, what do I mean? Well, cell phones, okay, or portable phones. They haven't been around that long. They've been around since about, I remember when I was living in Taiwan. I lived in Taiwan from 92 to 94. Left in 92, came back in 94. And when I left Canada in 1992, there were no cell phones really. I mean, there were satellite phones and a few things like that, but when you saw somebody with a portable phone, it was like really weird. I don't know if you guys can remember all the way back to like 1994, but it was pre-internet as well. But when I was in Taiwan, I started to see flip phones. Okay? And in Taiwan, they called a flip phone or a cell phone in 1993, they called it a dagu. And a Daga means big brother. And Daga is the name or title you give to the leader of a triad crew. So in the Italian mafia, you have the made men, the soldiers, and they're generally going to be part of a crew. And the leader of that crew is a capo, and the capos kick up to the Godfather, as brilliantly given to us in the Sopranos. But in Taiwan, they call the capo a daga, a big brother. Okay, and your big brother in the triad will take care of all your problems. You just go to your big brother and they take care of those problems. And the reason they started calling cell phones dagas is because the only people who had them in 93 were gangsters and politicos. It was that rare to see a cell phone. And now what does a cell phone do? Well, it allows you to communicate over great distances, which defy the physical instruments we've given. So by voice, you can't really communicate beyond, 30, 40 meters or yards if you're American. And if there's a wind, even less, okay, because the wind will cut your voice down. So there are limitations on the physical projection of communication. And so that limitation was mitigated by cell phones. But really the true mitigation in the evolutionary cycle is telepathy and conscious communication with each other. And you get to be able to do this at a certain point of unfoldment as a spiritual practitioner. Most evolved meditators I know can do this. Like, not at will, okay, and you can call it heightened intuition, you can call it whatever you want, but it's much more than that. You can get very, very specific messages from people, and they just come into your consciousness, and if you're evolved enough, you know that this is an incoming emotional projection from the other consciousness. And then generally what I'll do is I'll pick up a physical instrument and I'll call them. And they'll say, hey, I was just thinking about you. And I'll say, yeah, I know. Right? Because you can feel the energy when you get sensitive enough. And this is a great place for that kind of thing. Living up here in the Talamanca Mountains, you can get, quite sensitive to all of these things. And so I always know when somebody is thinking about me in some form of duress. And so that telepathy is the true spiritual unfoldment, which is coming, by the way. So the transformation we're going through now, those who go into the new, those people who go into the new consciousness field, that is going to be the human race, will be able to communicate with each other telepathically. And there will be no ability to lie or deceive. And so the mimicry of the negatives is the technology. And you get a lot of that as well with, the proposed brain inserts and brain chips that Elon Musk is talking about. And the technological road is not the one we want to go down. And I think one of the reasons that we're getting a lot of extraterrestrial information now, and I'm not talking about New Jersey per se, but for the last several decades it's been non-stop with the extraterrestrials. If you're tuned into it, if you're picking up on it, it's been fairly consistent. It's just been really, really non-stop, beginning in I'd say like the mid-90s. It begins with the internet, really, and it begins with people like Bill Cooper, very much an extraterrestrial narrative. Phil Schneider, I highly recommend you go back and watch some of the Phil Schneider presentations. They're still up on YouTube. Another martyr, by the way, like Sean David Morton, and Sean was killed, make no mistake about it, even though he lived with cancer for a number of years. It's my belief that he was very deliberately targeted and taken out. And you can see this reflected in the lack of care he got for his cancer when he was in the penal system. And just all, I mean, a tumor on your neck is not a difficult thing to heal for somebody of Sean's consciousness and abilities. But he was so hampered by the prison journey and the timing of it that it was just very indicative of what I would call a killing, you know, and a slow and torturous killing at that. Now, Phil Schneider, he was found in a horrible state, I think with barbed wire around his neck and, you know, 2 bullets to his head and severely beaten. And it was ruled a suicide. Another friend of Sean's, Danny Casalevo, I think his name is, Cassavetes or something like that, also killed, and he was reporting on the Promise software, which was a big story in the early 2000s. It kind of went away, but it's still a big story if you know about it and what they were setting up. And there's a brilliant documentary on Netflix now about that. I forget what the title of it is, but you can look it up. And yeah, very much sort of that. So the negative always mimics what is coming in the positive. And the negative is a sort of early sale. Okay, so get in now. And you know, people who don't have the discernment to understand what's being offered to them may very well take the offering, like the brain chip or like the technology that's coming, and not realize that it is a kind of consciousness bait. I don't want to say soul trap, because the soul can't really be trapped. The soul can be put into certain revolutions and cycles that will go over a number of incarnations, anywhere from, I don't know, 1 to 9 or something like that, depending on how deeply you get tied up in this stuff. But it is, the negative always tries to buy you off before something very positive is coming. Okay, and if you just had patience and you wait, you would get the true universal plan for what humanity is, and you wouldn't get the negative knockoff, the bootleg from the astral. And that's very much what's going on now. And you know, 2025 is going to be an equally interesting year. I do not agree with the people who say that we're going to destroy ourselves. I think that mass casualties are unavoidable at this point, and they have to do with, now remember, I'm back on YouTube, so I have to be very careful with my language. I'll try and say things in a sort of metaphorical, allegorical, or symbolic, or coded way, but hopefully you'll get my meaning. I think that mass casualties are on the way, basically because of certain changes to the deoxyribonucleic acid of human beings. And again, this is also an attempt to inhibit people from taking the gifts that are coming. Okay, and the gifts are coming. They will, I would say they'll be here by the end of this century. Okay, now that may seem like a long way off, 75 years, but I mean, it's half a blink of an eye in cosmic time. It's just a millisecond in cosmic time. Okay? So they're coming. And what the negative is always trying to do is keep a certain percentage of the human population in a low vibration, and that collective low vibration projects a lower state of consciousness for the whole human race. So part of our experience as being human is individual, and as an individual you can go to high states of consciousness. You can't share high consciousness with people. You can share almost everything in life. You can share your money, you can share your house, you can share your car. Some people share their husbands and wives, swingers. But you can't share high consciousness. Consciousness always has to be earned. It can't really be cheated. It can't really, and it has to be earned because it's a set of tests that you go through to make sure that you're suitable to go to the next level. Because it's a filtering process to make sure that the next level of existence is not polluted. Okay? So another way of saying that would be, they don't allow illegal immigration in the heavens. They just don't. You either get there by vibrational quality, or you don't get there. Okay? So it cannot be shared. And this is one of the dirty truths of the human race that not a lot of people like to talk about. We are not all created equal. Okay? I mean, we're equal in the sense that we have a share of the human experience called a life. And that's a dividend in a cosmic corporation, a cosmic enterprise. The incarnation is equal. You're born, you get your ass spanked, you get your umbilical cord cut, and you take a breath, and you're born. And we're all the same. We all come into the world the same way. Whether it's me, you, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Jesus Christ, the Buddha, or Muhammad, we all come into the world the same way. And that doorway is the womb of a woman. So we're all equal in that sense. And but in terms of the endowment of consciousness we have and the access to the higher regions and the memory of our previous lives, we're not all even at all. And this is one of the great things about planet Earth is we probably, now I haven't spent a lot of time visiting other planets and cultures in my consciousness journeys, in my meditation. I haven't been shown a lot of this stuff. I've been shown a few cultures, like 2 or 3 in the last 40 years. It's not something I ask for in meditation. In fact, I very rarely ask for anything in meditation except what is best for me in that meditation, whatever the higher forces want to show me, whatever they think I need to see, to learn, to know. And I sort of put it all in the Creator's hands, or in another way of saying that would be my higher self. And I don't press the issue. I don't seek to learn minor talents. And so when I see people like Courtney Brown and the remote viewing crowd and everything, I just, I mean, they advocate meditation and everything, and but there's something off about it. There's just something off about the way they communicate, and to me, what I would call their frequency is a little discordant to me. Okay, or dissonant, and dissonant is where it's a deviation from pure harmony. Okay, and it's certainly the Farsight Institute and those people there strike me as dissonant. And I can tell you why they're dissonant. They're dissonant because of the way they practice internal science, because they do it from a perspective of gaining specific skill sets. I want to be a remote viewer, I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to be psychic. Never ask for anything like that in a meditative journey. If it comes, it comes. And for me, it just comes and goes. I'll do things on occasion that people will go, my God, that guy's like a high-level clairvoyant. I'll go, no, that one thing just came to me because Spirit wanted me to know it in this instant, and that's it. You know, yeah, I can't pick lottery numbers. I can't tell you when you're going to die, and I'm not going to read, or I cannot read your past life records. So and that's because I don't want those things as a skill set per se. I just don't want them. Wanting things will weigh you down. Okay, so just like you can say that in, you know, in the material world, having a lot of material commitments will affect you spiritually. Okay, so I mean, people running corporations and things like this generally are not very evolved people. They're intellectually evolved, they're socially evolved, they may be culturally evolved based on the culture of our day, and our culture these days is a form of, you know, pirate capitalism based on a corrupt fiat money system predicated on a usury that just shears us like sheep every 7 years. And they've been doing this for decades now, decades. They live off of us. Slavery never went away. It's just that the state of the slave has changed. And the slave is allowed to believe that he or she is free. But you're not. Not if you're living in their system. You cannot be free in their system. It's not set up to allow you to be free. Okay? Now, there could be exceptions if you have a lot of money in your family and you don't have to work and you're a dilettante and you're going about the world and, you know, boogieing off to places like Guanacaste, Costa Rica for an ibogaine or an ayahuasca or a DMT experience, okay? That's another example of point-specific spiritual unfoldment or pseudo-spiritual unfoldment that I would recommend against. It never goes anywhere. The true spiritual path is slow, consistent, and unyieldingly patient in its unfoldment. And eventually you get to a point where you don't want anything. Okay, so you're not, when you sit down to meditate, you say, oh, I want to go to the crystal cities. I want to see them in my mind's eye. I want to leave my body and go to the crystal cities. I used to have all kinds of fantasies like this and stuff when I first started meditating, you know, when I was 17 for about the first 10 years. And I used to try to project myself places, and I learned how to do it to a certain degree. Like I could... you know, if I wanted to be in Times Square, New York, and I was in Ottawa, Canada, or Toronto, Canada, I would sit down and I would focus on New York. And if you focus on something long enough, you will transport yourself there. And there were times where I would just pop into Times Square, and I knew I was there on the astral, right? And then I just sort of started, you know, I just sort of gave it up. It kind of wore itself out. And now... the contemplative experience for me is just about going in and finding out, going in without any requirement, without any goal or any strategy other than to be of service to myself, to expand myself, to grow myself, to bring more of my true self into the world, and ultimately to be of service to the creator of life. That's it. And now, but even with that mandate, you still get freaky experiences. Right? You still get, you know, tremendously freaky experiences. A lot of light in meditation now. So, whereas when you start, you'll want, and there's nothing wrong with having a few of these inclinations when you begin, because what you're doing is you're proving the process out to yourself. Is my consciousness really capable of going somewhere else? Well, I do think that's an important question to answer. I do. So, I mean, if you do some experiments and you try to project yourself to Paris or New York or India or, you know, the Congo or wherever you want to go, and you do go there, then you'll go, yeah, that was real. And you'll always know when they're real. Because number one, the imagery becomes the imagery inside of you becomes completely unblurred. Your internal vision is more clear than your physical vision. There's generally a pulling out of or a popping out of your body sensation. So very quickly you go from being aware of your body, like, so I sit in a half lotus. So I have my right foot over my left knee. And it's a relatively uncomfortable position. And I have to do some breathing in the first 10 minutes to get myself comfortable, some very focused abdominal breathing. And then at a certain stage in the meditative process, I'll become unaware of all discomfort in my body, like I'm not in my body. And that's because I'm not. And it happens instantaneously. You go from being conscious of your body to not being conscious of your body. Maybe it's the same as falling asleep, but without losing consciousness. Very, very interesting process. And now what I find as I continue in my journey is like a lot of things that need to be tied up will come into consciousness when I'm in meditation. A lot of people who need me will speak to me on the astral, and then I'll go and see what they need, and then if I'm capable of giving it to them, I give it to them. And in the physical, they never even know I did this. But if I check up on them a few weeks later, whether they realize it or not, I really did it. And then there's just the reception of energy. And these are just torrents of sound. Object sound, but inside you, and then pulses or blasts of light, and this is the higher levels of meditation. So it's all very real. It is well worth your time to invest and to do these things. So they say that you are in the world but not of the world, is the old Sufi saying. And I would say that that's true. Like, I'm definitely in the world, and I can definitely go into the game. I can get quite heated and emotional when I'm talking about politics. I can get quite heated and emotional when I'm observing something that I consider to be really high-level evil. And but when I'm not podcasting and I'm not talking about it and I'm not thinking about it, it doesn't bother me really. And even the people doing the really negative thing, I can even find it in myself to love them. The pedophiles are hard. The child killers are hard. They're hard. I don't think I'll ever have any love for them. I feel sorry for them, right? I feel very, very sorry for them. So with all of this as a kind of prelude to this Christmas show, this 'Twas the Night Before show, let's take a look at some of the things that have happened in 2024 and the minor transformative cycle that we're in now. And this is just a minor one, by the way. Okay, so Trump is minor. Trudeau getting kicked out of... Thank you, JG Starkiller. You may be the first person to buy the EPUB version of The Devil in Us, because I just did it about a week ago and put it up, or about 10 days ago. And I hope you enjoy it. I wish more people who read the books would call in. You know, it's very interesting to me that the only guy who had the courage to really call in and talk about the books was Mark Cicerello in Pennsylvania. I think he's in Philadelphia. City of brotherly love, they say. And they got the Rocky Balboa statue there. Great young man. Gives me hope for the future, right? When I meet a young man like that. Great guy. I'm very fortunate to meet people like this. I get a few messages this week from my friend Nelson, the Buddhist contemplative. Not sure where he is now. Last I heard, he was in India. He's either in India or Korea right now. Came back to Canada. Was in Canada for about a year, and in a relatively unpopulated area too, like a city of about 100,000 people. But he could not believe how much Canada had changed. He'd been away for about 7 years, and then he hung around for a year, and then he bolted again. And Nelson is one of the most disciplined human beings I know. He is a true practitioner. He's a mechanic, a spiritual mechanic, gets the work in, and, very evolved meditator, capable of sitting down and cross-legged without a pillow and just meditating all night, not sleeping. And I have a lot of friends like that now. I seem to have reached a stage in my life where these kinds of people are just coming into my life more and more and more. So the minor cycle is, of course, Trump, and this is setting up the third temple of Solomon and the attempted scapegoating of the Gentiles of the world for the sins of the Jews. Okay, I don't think I've ever said it that simply before, and I'm not saying that in an anti-Semitic way. I'm not saying that in a hateful way. It just is what it is. Okay, it just is what it is. But that's what they're trying to do, and they need to fulfill all of these prophecies, which are the ritual machinations to affect the ritual that might allow us, or in fact the best of us, to be scapegoated for their sins. I was listening to a podcast a day ago by a guy I occasionally listen to, but not often, by the name of Christopher John Bjerkens. And you can find him on YouTube under CJB Books. And a very interesting guy. He's been studying the Kabbalah, the Zohar, and the Talmud for about 30 years. I can't remember if he was raised in the Jewish culture or not. He might be. But gives like an incredible deconstruction of what's really going on in the Bible, to the point where after you listen to him for a few hours, you may never go back to those texts again, and I don't know why he would retract that message. But the one I was listening to, he was saying that Job was the first telling of the Christ story, kind of like a dry run. And something that not a lot of people have ever picked up on is that Job and his wife were Gentiles. They weren't Jews. And Job was set up for that suffering by the tribe. It wasn't brought on by God. They sort of tricked the devil into focusing on Job, right? And like the Christ story itself, it is an unbelievable scapegoat story, right? And scapegoating itself is an absolutely fascinating ritual. There's a lot of transference rituals out there that not a lot of people know about. You can transfer consciousness from one body to another. Okay, so people talk about immortality. There's been forms of immortality on the planet for quite some time now. Not in great numbers, but there are certain groups on the planet in which like a single consciousness has been existent continuously without going into cycle. Going into cycle means dying and being reborn, and losing your memories and coming back and starting afresh, and going through the memory destruction program. Because in the original system, we were supposed to be born with the vast majority of our memories intact. Because when you think about it, reincarnation doesn't have much purpose unless you remember the life before. And unless you know that the rebirth is to fix things from the life before. What is the point of reincarnating without memory of the previous lives? And so this was part of the original cosmology, and it was taken out technologically. This is part of the negative group that came here, right? And so reincarnation, the reincarnation we go through now, the better word would be recycling. It's a form of recycling more than it is a form of reincarnation. And this has been done by an elaborate astrophysical net system here. And all the stories you've heard are true. There is a massive base on the dark side of the moon that is used for frequency control here. Most things you've heard are true in some measure, and many of them true in great measure, meaning 80 or 90% of the story given is valid and true. And it's a lot to take in, because when you begin to digest it all, it's extremely, extremely negative. And so the goal of the human race, and we're the most adaptable and perseverant of all the species in the universe, I think. We're like the cockroaches of this universe. And you can kill one or two of us, but it's impossible to eradicate us, right? And so we just keep adapting and growing. And adaptability is one of the characteristics of the human race. We're extremely adaptable, and can overcome almost any obstacle. And we're on the cusp now of overcoming the incarnation grid and the hack system that's been put on top of us. And this is what's really going on behind the curtain in the invisible worlds. And this is why, by the way, all of the control mechanism is being physically manifest now. It's not that they just waited until they had the technology to do it. That's erroneous. The technology to do it, they could have deployed this technology 500 years ago. The controlling forces that are governing this planet have had this technology for millennia and millennia and millennia. So why are they deploying it now? Because it has to descend down into the 3D, because they've lost in 4D. Which means eventually they're going to lose in 3D, because what happens above trickles down below. Right? It's the way the whole system works. So as scary as the world looks, right? I guess I'm getting to my Christmas message, right? Talking about 2024. As scary as the world looks right now, when you have the eyes and the eye to see it, it's actually very beautiful, because we're overcoming things now that have been extremely oppressive for a long time. And we're going to unshackle ourselves from a lot of things that have been very destructive for us. Another negative cycle I'll touch on right now is the resurgence of the Abrahamic religions. Okay? So one of the reasons that the Abrahamic religions are in a resurgence now is because liberalism was overstimulated and it went too far and people were shocked. And this has all been done deliberately. It's like, remember, it's a ping pong game. Ball goes to one side of the table, they hit it back to the other. Okay? It's just that the ball crosses the net once a decade, so it's hard to keep your attention on the game. But that, make no mistake about it, that's what's going on here. Okay? So the transgenderism and the androgyny and the hacking and mutilation of the body, the disinterest with procreation and family, the copious numbers of people raising children in a non-unified family, which is psychologically damaging for the children, by the way. And there's no psychiatrist, liberal or conservative, who would disagree with that. No psychologist who would disagree with that. Every study they've ever done has shown that children raised without fathers have a significant disadvantage in life. Higher suicide rates, lower success rates, it's just through the roof. Of course, there are exceptions. You know, there's always somebody, hey, Bruce, what about? You know, yeah, it's not an absolute rule, right? But generally and specifically speaking, you are in a severe deficit if you don't have a father or if you don't have a mother. You need both. And ideally, they need to be living together and cooperating to raise you. This is the way the universe, this reality for the hominid species we call the human race, was set up. And so then we get the rise of the moral Jews, which is an oxymoron. There's moral Jew is an oxymoron. They're hands down the most immoral people on the planet. Okay, I'm not trying to be anti-Semitic. It just is what it is. When you know. But they fool a lot of people. philanthropy, giving, so steal 5 billion and give 1 million to a foundation for children without fathers. Oh, they're so good. They're so moral. He gave $1 million to this foundation from the 5 billion he ripped off from the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the Toronto Stock Exchange, and the New York Stock Exchange. I think Christ referred to this as giving alms publicly to bolster your ego in the Gospels. So we get the rise of these pseudo 21st century pseudo theologians like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a pseudo theologian. He really doesn't understand what he's talking about. He has mental giant and a spiritual dwarf. And the people who get this way outside of the Jewish community, and they can be excused for it because they're raised to believe they're the chosen people, so why wouldn't they think they're the chosen people? That's a pretty good moniker to have, right? I mean, if I was raised in that culture, I probably wouldn't let go of the idea that I was chosen by God for a higher purpose than the average human being, because it's extremely flattering, right? And that's how the Jews get sucked in. And you've got people like Douglas Murray, the British twink, Israel's twink, and they always hit the same points, right? Like Peterson said, well, the Jews made the desert bloom. Highly productive people, and anybody would be that productive if they had a population of 5 million and they were receiving hundreds of billions a year in reparations and aid from Western countries, Germany, the United States, Canada, Ireland, Great Britain. I think Israel is the largest recipient of foreign aid of any country in the world. Okay? And who couldn't make the desert bloom with all that money? You put me in a desert and you give me $100 billion a year and 3 million people, and I'll make it bloom in 10 years. I'll just hire the engineers and bring them in to do it, and then when it's done, kick them out because they're not kosher. And that's how they do it, right? There's nothing special about them. But what 2024 told me definitively is they're really going to do this. I was kind of sitting on the fence for the longest period of time. I didn't know for sure. Whether they were really going to go for the third temple and everything. I suppose, no, I would say I was sitting on the fence until 2023, specifically October 7th, 2023, when the IDF and the Mossad attacked its own people and blamed it on Hamas. And of course, another big clue was bringing over the perfect red heifers. I'm going to stop there tonight. My throat's a little, dry. But I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review. 'Twas the night before. You folks have a wonderful Christmas day, and may life and the Creator bless you, touch your hearts, and allow you to see through the illusion of the time we're living in, without getting angry or vengeful, to continue to love everybody. Okay? Even the evildoers. Because there, but by the grace of God, go you 5 incarnations ago. We're all in this soup together, right? You got to be careful with the finger pointing. Peace out, folks, and Merry Christmas.